All right, let's call this committee the whole meeting to order. There are two late items as noted on the replacement agenda. Second delegation here from Mr. Wager, and then also the updated report from staff on multi-material and C stuff. So with those additions, adoption of the agenda will be ordered.
So moved.
Second.
Adoption, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Pleased to welcome here as our first delegation, Inspector Blair McDonald from the Fremont Valley RCMP to give us his update. And he just handed out a bit of information, so over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Once again, as always, thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. I'm always pleased to come have a chat with you. I've handed you out a lot of information. I'll go through a little bit of it as we go through. A couple things I just wanted to touch on. There's a recent media story about Stats Canada releasing the 2012 numbers, reduction in overall crime rates, increase in safety and that sort of thing, and certainly that is all accurate and true. But I think you will find if our trending here in British Columbia is the same across Canada, which I think it is, I think you'll find things are going to trend higher this year for the first time in quite some time.
And sorry, what did you say now?
That's just what the BC statistics have shown thus far this year is an overall increase as opposed to decrease, which we've seen for the last several years. So I've presented this sort of report numerous times in the past. I think everybody's probably got a pretty good handle on what it looks like now and why and what it's all about. So I'll just briefly touch on things. If you look at that first, total persons categories, total property, and overall criminal code, you see things are pretty stable, a slight increase, 10% in some various things as we go. So these statistics here represent the second quarter of the year, if you like. So from January to June 30th, we're still in the third quarter, so I don't have those for you yet. If you just go down to the bottom of the page here, and I will come back to the first page in a bit, for an issue that I'm sure everyone's interested in. But just look down at the bottom for now. The traffic things are on the bottom. You'll see, as we talked about last time, increase in 90-day suspensions. That's, of course, the IRP program, and you'll probably see those numbers trending up for quite some time until that stabilizes a little bit, as it is still relatively new. If you look at your page 2, it just shows an increase in traffic enforcement in the town of Comox. And if you look down at almost to the very bottom, the second category says total calls for service, and that shows a 12% increase and 11% increase in founded calls for service. So this is the pattern that we're seeing here. It's holding true for most of Vancouver Island and most of the province of British Columbia, as well as a trending increase in calls for service, and along with that goes a trending increase in crime. Let's flip back to page 1. Look at the big glaring red number here. If you look at breaking into businesses, you'll see for the first quarter it says 1, going from 1 to 11 from 2012 to 13. And if you actually flip to the back page of that package, you'll see a Comox Valley crime map. This has no fewer than 16 little red dots on it. Some of those red dots represent multiple occurrences, because in fact from May 1st to now there have been 26 business breaking-ins in the town of Comox. So some of them happen very close together, so that's why you have individual circles on the map. Now, what can I say about those? Can't say a lot right now. I can tell you that the modus operandi for all of them is very similar. Target is cash that's left behind in the businesses. Investigation is ongoing, and significant resources from the detachment are being directed to those investigations. That's about really all I can say about those investigations right now. Touch base on a couple other things from a staffing perspective. We've had a couple of retirements recently and some transfers out. We have 6 new members transferring in, so we will be full up as soon as those people are able to sell houses and move theirs. From a staffing perspective, we're being treated very well by RCMP staffing in terms of getting our numbers up to where they should be. Now, that's my little piece. Any questions you might have, I'll be happy to answer if I can.
Sure. Certainly on the B&Es, heard from residents and businesses about that. I assume that RCMP is touch with those businesses about steps they can take to minimize that kind of issue? The cash box, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Been in touch with those businesses in
Yeah.
particular, and also been in touch with all other businesses through the media, just to make them aware that this is going on, the steps they can take to hopefully reduce themselves as a target.
And I assume that things like surveillance cameras, things like that are a possibility in some of those cases?
Certainly a possibility.
I know this issue came up in Courtney, was it last year maybe, or the year before? There seemed to be a flurry of those events, and then it seemed to die off after either somebody was caught or there were steps taken.
Right, and that's usually the way these kind of things run. I can tell you that just from the nature of these, that I always have to be careful the way I phrase these things in public anyway, but we are likely looking at one or two or three or a small group of individuals that are doing all of these.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised. Tom, did you have a question?
No.
Anyone else? Okay, Carrie.
So, any other questions you have?
All right, well.
Well, I guess I'll just quickly tell you about the rest of those papers you're holding. The first two pages just encapsulate the first half of the year, so January, and then the next two are the first quarter of the year, the next two are the second quarter of the year, just so it's broken down through a little bit. And then the last page, of course, is that now.
On the IRP stuff, there's, you're only aware of that recent case, I think it was decided in the last couple of days around the so-called reasonable probable grounds. Is that, I mean, I assume that's something that your detachment's aware of, you take the necessary procedural steps to make sure that those things stick, but there's always a judge out there who's going to put a twist on it. So.
Right. And I don't want to judge the people involved in that too harshly or anything, but those things often come down to a matter of articulation and what was said and what wasn't said. And usually those types of readings are accompanied with observations of behavior of the person involved. And in this case, in that particular case, there were no supporting observations to indicate that they were somehow affected by alcohol. So, and it could just be a matter that, those things were noticed but weren't said. I can't say exactly how that happened, but certainly that's an issue that we're aware of here, and that's part of the training for the IRP program is that it's not simply the number that the box generates, it's other surrounding observations as well.
And as far as the traffic tickets are concerned, I certainly appreciate that stepped up enforcement would be part of the reason behind that. Are you seeing that? You said there's trends overall. Are you seeing a trend towards more tickets being issued because of more enforcement, or is it just because people need to be reminded?
I cannot say that it's because of more enforcement of late. I think it's just more of driving habits and what are being found by the members that are out there.
And are you taking any particular focus locally on the distracted driver issue?
We follow along with the rest of the province on those monthly initiatives. So, we distracted driving 1 month, seatbelts another month, intersection safety. Intersection safety is really undistracted driving or year-round things that we tend to work on. But just to back up to your previous question, as part of our APP, as you're aware of, the annual performance plan, it is a strategic direction on behalf of the detachment to involve more of the detachment on a more consistent basis in traffic enforcement. So that's also a reflection of those numbers as well. So not just the traffic section itself.
All right, and I certainly appreciate your efforts in all those aspects, and hopefully you can solve some of these issues in downtown Collins.
I'm hopeful that that's going to happen as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so our second delegation is Robert Wager of the Brown University on genetically modified organisms. So you have a presentation and you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Coming.
Yep.
Thank you, Your Worship and Councillors, for having me here today. I appreciate your time that you're giving me. The reason I'm here today is specifically about Resolution B72 that will be debated at the UCBM in the coming week. or a week and a half, somewhere from there.
Next week.
It deals with banning of GM crops, banning the import, export, and growing of GM crops in the province. The first thing, we have to back up a little bit before we get to the specific thing. People have to understand that there's nothing natural about agriculture. Agriculture is, by definition, the manipulation of DNA of plants and animals to suit our needs. It has nothing to do with the welfare of the plants and animals. It's what we get out of the food. We've been changing the DNA of our food for 10,000 years. Only the methods have changed over time. These are some typical weeds you would see, and by changing the DNA of those, whoops, he's gone to the very end.
Sure.
I'm not going to use all the slides there. Some of those are there for backup. Okay, so by changing the DNA of those, we get what we modern recognize as carrots, lettuce, and corn. Next one, please. The tomato is another good example. Its wild relative, ancient relative, grows in the mountains of South America, but it's very poisonous. And so by changing the DNA of those, we have reduced the glycoalkaloids, which are poisonous, and we have the modern day tomato. Unfortunately, they lost the flavor with that too, so not much we can do about that. Next, please. Wild brassica is probably the most manipulated crop. 500 BC, changing the DNA, we got kale. Then by 100 AD, we got cabbage and kohlrabi. By changing that DNA, we got cauliflower in the 1400s. In the 1500s, by changing cauliflower DNA, we got broccoli. And then, unfortunately, we made Brussels sprouts. I'm not a fan of Brussels sprouts. Next, please. This is a really good example of how the power of one gene. On the right and on the left are two identical genetic components of a papaya plant with one added gene, the gene for the coat protein of the papaya ring spot virus. By putting just that coat protein gene into the papaya plant and then growing them in the presence of the pathogenic virus, you can see the difference. On the right is the wild type, and on the left is the transgenic. Well, in 1994, this virus arrived in the main papaya growing region of Hawaii, and it decimated the papaya crops in the Puna region. But fortunately, this publicly funded research had already been done, and the crops were ready to go. Here you can see 13 months after planting of the GM crops. And here you see in 1997, a year later, in the middle are the transgenic papaya, and all around them are the isogenic, or the same parental type of papaya without the transgene, and they're being affected by the virus in the area. It's still there today. Here's a 2011 picture. In the foreground are non-transgenic papaya, completely wiped out by the virus. And in the background are the papaya with the added one gene that allows them to be protected against this devastating viral pest. So that's an example of just the power of changing one gene. B72, which is the resolution brought to the UCBM by Machosen, states that whereas genetically engineered crops through pollination can disperse their pollen genes indiscriminately and resulting in lawsuits and loss of organic certification, or whereas the DNA produces potential unintended consequences, or whereas it helps maintain the long-term sustainability, but in this case they're talking about just organic agriculture. I'd like to address some of these points as I could, please. The first one, organic certification and lawsuits. Organic certification has nothing to do with the quality or lack of the end product. It is a process-based system. The certification of organic crops is based on a set of prescribed production methods. As long as you adhere to those production methods, your certification is safe. It has nothing to do with trace amounts of anything. Certification is not determined on those bases. The good example of this comes last year when the Organic Seed Growers and Trade Association, about 30,000 plaintiffs, sued Monsanto, claiming that they were losing organic certification for trace amounts of GM crops. When the judge said, bring forward your evidence, 30,000 plaintiffs, not one person could bring forward one example of a decertification of an organic crop for trace amounts of GM crop, or GM contamination in their terms. Then the judge asked, will you please bring forward the evidence that you have been sued by Monsanto for trace amounts of GM crops showing up in a non-GM field? Once again, not one person brought forward one piece of evidence demonstrating that Monsanto had sued anybody for what is known as adventitious presence or trace amounts of GM crops in a non-GM field. The judge threw out the case saying it was a clear attempt to create a controversy where none exists. The appeal went forward, it was denied. Now they're taking it to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court in the US will hear it, but I doubt that will be the case. Potential unintended consequences. Next, please. When you look at the science of GM crops, it's best to go back to the beginning where the National Academy of Science in the US in 1987 stated three main conclusions. First of all, there is no evidence that there is a unique hazard from GM crop breeding. Second of all, that the risks associated with that are the same as those associated with other breeding methods. And third, we should look at the nature of the product itself, not the process used to create it. This three conclusions have been upheld 2 more times in further white papers, and you can see this is the American Medical Association's 2012 endorsement of those very facts. We hear a lot about the science in North America and how Europe is so much different. But Europe is no different than North America on a scientific position. They state very clearly that after 130 research projects covering 25 years of research involving 500 independent researchers, the biotechnology and in particular GMOs are not per se more risky than from conventional crops. And when it comes to the environment, that's fine. After 25 years of field trials, they did not find any evidence of harm. So the science in Europe is exactly the same as the scientific opinion around the world. And I hope you people did get the documents I sent you outlining major scientific opinions around the world. Europe is no different. The political environment in Europe is very different. The 2012 American Association for the Advancement of Science said it very well when they said that the AMA, the National Academy of Science, the British Royal Society, and every other respected organization that has examined the evidence has come to the same conclusion, that consuming GM crops and ingredients derived from GM crops is no riskier than consuming foods from other conventional breeding methods. So the risk is exactly the same. There's no evidence of harm, and there's no evidence of lawsuits or decertification. Sustainability. The
Mr.
2010
Just
National...
so you know, your 10 minutes is up. Are you
Okay, what would you like me to do? I was waiting on the projector.
Okay, we'll give you another minute or two and
Okay.
we can wrap up.
Okay. As for sustainability, the National Academy of Science impact of genetically engineered crops and farm sustainability in the U.S. made it very clear that there were substantial net environmental and economic benefits to be derived by using these crops. They had fewer adverse effects on the environment and it allowed the farmers to reduce the amount of insecticides. When Richmond last year addressed this ban council, they asked the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority for their opinion, and what they got back was there is no evidence that Health Canada has approved GM crops and foods are any less safe for human health than the non-GE varieties, and there is no public health reason for a ban of GM crops. The last point I want to make is about farming. According to Stats Canada, only 2% of Canadian farms list themselves as organic farms. They have self-imposed rules about not using GM crops. B72 asks the provincial councillors to disregard the 98% of the farmers in the province and instill rules that the 2% of the farmers in the province have self-imposed. That doesn't seem very democratic to me. I'll leave you to decide that. These are a list of a variety of crops that are working their way through the market that Vancouver Island farmers could use and will use when GM crops, these ones, work their way through the regulatory system. Next, please. So B72 is not based on facts. Organic certification is not threatened. No lawsuits have ever happened by Monsanto for trace amounts of GM crops in a non-field. There have been no unintended consequences after 25 years of research, according to European researchers. And GM crops are as safe as conventional breeding, according to the entire world's scientific opinion. Thank you. I'll stop there and answer any questions you have.
Questions from members of council? Councillor Price and Grant.
And I'd just like to say welcome you here, and at our last committee of the whole we did have Dr. Terry Brain, who has worked extensively in the biotech field, and I'd just like to thank you for seeking out this opportunity to bring your opinion, and I really appreciate that, Mr. Wager. And it really is a charged issue, and I really do feel that this isn't the forum for debate, or this isn't the forum for debate. But I really do have to emphasize that I certainly appreciate that you've come and expressed your opinion, and I do wish the world was that simplistic. And I guess I have just one quick question. Are you speaking on behalf of Vancouver Island University?
No.
We have it on our delegation.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm speaking strictly as a person, and any opinion that Vancouver Island University may or may not have with respect to GM crops has nothing to do with my presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Grant.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Wager. My question revolves around the health and the science involved with GMO foods. I think in a recent letter to the editor that slams me quite well, talked about how GMO foods, and there's science to back this up, have caused asthma, diabetes, Alzheimer's, a whole litany of diseases that have come about because of GMO foods, and that there's science to back it up. Now, that goes completely contrary to what you just presented, so can you speak on that?
Yes, unfortunately that most of those statements all come from one paper that was published last year by a computer scientist from MIT. She has absolutely zero training in food pharmacology, food toxicology, animal physiology, or any of the relevant disciplines in order to examine food for safety. It's a good example of what I refer to as pseudoscience that has become very prolific on the internet, and it's unfortunate that the average person, including everyone in this room if you're not trained in the disciplines, is simply unable to differentiate between the pseudoscience, which is designed to scare you, not educate you, and the real science. However, global bodies that do know the science are not fooled by this. And that's why even in the 2013 World Health Organization, they make it very clear in their 20 questions about GM foods that there is zero evidence of any harm in the countries that consume GM crops. And this is after 17 years of commercialization and over 3 trillion meals.
Okay, thank you for the answer, Councillor McKinnon.
Yes, Mr. Wager, thank you for speaking to us today. I have 2 questions. First one is that if there's no evidence that's been acquired, why, in your estimation, why is Europe and so many European and Asian countries either ban GE products or else insisted on labeling?
There's several points to that. The first one is that you must be made aware that the Europeans' highest court has struck down the ban on GM crops for lack of evidence. So So that happened in March of 2012. The European politicians are still maintaining those bans, even though the courts say they are illegal. So that's 27 of the countries right off the top that have lost their bans on GM crops. Europe has used the GM issue as a very effective non-tariff trade barrier to keep out competition from North America and South America now, agricultural competition. That won't last for very much longer. A third of the EU budget is used for agricultural subsidies, and everybody is fully aware of the financial meltdown that's happening in Europe. So the subsidies are going to take a hit. When the European farmers are no longer paid to not grow GM crops, what do you think they're going to grow? Exactly what their competition around the world grows. So that won't last for very much longer. The labeling issue is very convoluted, and it's extremely difficult to give you a 2-minute soundbite to answer that. I would recommend, and I can give a link, to the American Medical Association / American Association for the Advancement of Science document on labeling of bioengineered foods. It's about 17 pages long, and it deals with most of the aspects. After reading that, you'll have a better idea about labeling policies and why we label in North America different from different parts of the world.
Thank you for that abbreviated answer. My second question is, we had a speaker last week, Dr. Vrain, who my understanding is a retired research scientist that's speaking in favor of bans for GMO products. You're speaking against it. He explained his passion, why he's speaking against it, in favor of it, I should say. What is your interest in all this? Your position at BIU is not involved with this?
No, although that's my area of research, and I've been active in this for a long time. I got involved with this particular subject about the year 1999-2000, when it was becoming clear to me that back then the internet was relatively new. And when you typed in GMOs, or genetically modified organism, about 95% of the information that was on the internet at that point was misleading, false, or what I refer to as pseudoscience. Now it's a little better. Today it's about 60-40. So the real good information is available, but unfortunately people have to be trained to be able to differentiate the science from what I refer to as pseudoscience. And if you're not, you have to rely on national and international scientific bodies who are trained in the science and look at that. And those opinions I've given you all, so you can see what the global opinions are in that respect.
I didn't get the opportunity to ask Dr. Vrain last week. The question is he being funded by anyone to speak? And I will ask you that question. Is anyone funding you to speak?
No, I've never received any money personally for any of my activities.
Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Grant.
I'd be interested in his answer.
I just have one more question, and it's with regards to a question that was brought up by Councillor Price last week with regards to golden rice. And we had, after we had the answer, we had a subsequent email from the lady who answered your question and said that golden rice, that you have to eat way too much of it for it to be effective, and that you have to supplement it with a protein for it to be effective against blindness and or death in these poor children who live on nothing but rice. Do you know anything about golden rice in this whole situation?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with golden rice issue, and if you are interested and want to find out the facts, go to goldenrice.org. You will be able to find out the real facts. That particular statement about not having enough vitamin A comes from a 1999 Greenpeace document and refers to the first version of golden rice, which had 2 bacterial genes and 1 gene from daffodil. Unfortunately, the level of beta-carotene, which is the actual component that our bodies convert into vitamin A, in the golden rice 1, the first version, was very low. The present version, golden rice 2, replaced the daffodil gene with a corn gene. And the average production of beta-carotene in golden rice 2 is about 15 micrograms per 100 grams of rice. So 100 grams of rice is well within a daily consumption rate for people who feed on rice only, and it will easily be enough to thwart vitamin A deficiency diseases around the world.
All right, thank you for that answer. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Move on to the rest of the agenda. All right, we have no minutes. We do have a number of departmental reports. The first one for receipt is the fire department quarterly report. Thank you. Seconder, Pat? In favor? Motion carried. Any questions, comments for our fire chief? He is in attendance, as you know. Go ahead.
Your recruiting issues, Chief, how are things coming with recruiting? And some good news?
Well, through the chair, recruiting is going fine. The issue is not so much the recruitment, it's the retention and the training period it takes to train new people. We're currently interviewing people for filling about 10 or 12 call positions. We have about 20 applications or so. So we're having a fair number of applications. It's just trying to find the right persons that's suitable, people producing a response, and then keeping them long enough that we can train them and kind of get some value out of them. What we're finding in the last few years is they're turning over so quickly.
Councilor Price?
Yes, and thank you, a very good report. And I was very impressed by the community support with Comox Valley Dodge giving us a leased vehicle and then an insurance company giving us the insurance. I think that's perhaps testament to you all going out and inspiring.
As noted, that's been ongoing for 11 years, so it's certainly great support. You know, the financial value there is huge. This particular vehicle is probably not the one we would have chosen, but it was the one at the top of it, so and the price is great.
Good. And I was also pleased, one of the lines, that you are looking at the refillable water bottles and moving in that direction with small steps, but it's great that you've been so
Yeah,
proactive.
so on that issue, we purchased 1,000 for our training center, which we'll use up through a calendar year. We've also just recently received an order of about 1,000 for our fire prevention team, which goes out to those different activities, public events and stuff. So we'll be given, the markets differently, they already have fire safety messages on. So those just came in last week, and we'll be given those out for the next few public events.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Swift?
I just have a question about it. It says there's a reduction in the type of first responder calls that the fire department assists with. So can you just...
Yeah, BCM is categorized as their medical calls in 5 categories, B, C, D, and E. The E being most severe. We found over the years that the C category and the middle category, we've never responded to A and B's, but we were responding to C's quite often. We were getting there, and patients were conscious alert. Not really in that higher unique or type of response, and it was overwhelming. So we dropped that category, we still respond to D's and D's for heart attacks, strokes, it's going to reduce our call volume by probably about our call.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your report, Chief. All right, Planning and Building Department quarterly reports for receipt.
Second.
Those in favor, motion's carried. Planner is not here, as you may know. He suffered a cycling accident and he's a broken collarbone, so he's working as best he can. CAO, any questions, I guess, could be addressed to you? Any questions?
Are we making any headway with the stuff up Pritchard Road?
The stormwater management plan. Yep. There should be, the next phase of the report should be coming back to us this month from the engineers.
And there's only 2 phases to the report, isn't it?
Yes. Before we broke for the summer, we had a meeting with them in terms of resolving any outstanding issues and how we get back on track in time. And so we are expecting a report any day.
And where do we go from there?
Well, once we review it and our staff review it and our engineer reviews it, there's a requirement for public meetings as well. And at that time, there will also be design elements that can start in terms of development elements themselves and subdivision process.
Any further questions on this report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next one. That is the financial statement report for second quarter June 30th. Motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
Received then, all in favor? Motion is carried. Our Director of Finance is here to answer any questions that members of council may have. Seeing none, thank you for your report, relatively self-explanatory. We have the Parks and Building Maintenance report from our Park Superintendent, Fraser is here, and the motion received will be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Received then, all in favor? Motion is carried. And any questions to be addressed?
I just want to make a comment that council once again set aside money in the budget to do some more renovations next door, this time in the basement where the bridge players work, and there was a collaboration between the town of Comox, the Comox Seniors, and the Comox Rotary Club. And if you get a chance, you should just take a trip downstairs and see what was done down there, because it was really what used to be almost a dungeon where they played cards is now really nice. So,
Okay, that's good here.
I don't know if Al wants to comment on it.
The only thing I'd like to say is just reiterate what you said, Councillor Grant, is that it was a collaborative effort, and the partnership that we've been nurturing over the years with Rotary and their participation is greatly appreciated. And the facility speaks for itself, and in the end result now we have what I would class as pretty well 90% full interior renovation that's being utilized by many groups, and we're getting a lot of good positive feedback by the community. So it's just it's a win-win for everybody.
All right, great. Go ahead, you.
Yes, just a couple of questions about completion dates or tentative dates. The Cottonwood Greenway, is there?
We're getting very close now. The contractor is supposed to be back today. Unfortunately, he's tied up on a trail project in Courtney and is now assured that he will be back with us on Tuesday of next week with a look at substantial completion by the following Friday. So we're getting there. I know it's been a long process, but light is at the end of the tunnel finally.
Thank you. Some neighbors are asking about that. And the Anderton tennis courts, the completion date for that?
It looks, well, the tentative construction scheduled completion date is September 20th. It looks like we're going to be very, very close, other than a little bit of landscaping. The courts were power washed yesterday. The Tomco, the company that's coming in to paint them, is scheduled for next week. That will take them probably 2 or 3 days to complete the painting. But at this point in time, we're probably at, I would say, 90% substantial completion. It's just a few things that need to be tidied up.
Great.
And just the last thing, compliments to your crew for the flowers and everything downtown this year. We had some visitors who were complimenting our town, which is nice to hear.
Thank you, and I'll pass that along to the crew.
All right, you had a planting, I guess, last Friday as well at the Cottonwood Greenway, went well?
Yes, it went well, and we're looking forward to doing that again at a date yet to be determined. We had Councillor Swift join us and a few members from the CTRA and of course members from my staff, and yeah, it went well. So we'll be looking forward to engaging CTRA members again, as well as the ECO team from Highland. It was a little bit early in their reintroduction back to their school duties, so we'll be working with Jill Peacock and her gang to get them back in the swing of things.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we'll move on now to the bylaw enforcement quarterly report April to June for receipts.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion's carried. Any questions for Shelley at this time? administrator prepared this report. Again, relatively self-explanatory. Any more questions? We can move on to Recreation Department Manager report April to June 2015. For receipt.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Motion's carried. Again, relatively brief report, self-explanatory. Things are moving along in regards to the work plan items. Any questions for Mr. Stevenson?
So congratulations on the award for the fitness centre. That's pretty spectacular that in Little Comox we can move ahead of all the big movers and shakers. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some of those big movers and shakers are actually getting small.
Secret.
In any event, we'll move on to the Public Works report, third quarter capital and operational status. Shelley Ackler, our municipal engineer, has provided this for receipt.
So
Move receipt.
Receipt then, all those in favor, motion is carried. Again, that highlights in a nice format the status of various projects. I take it at this point you're getting down to the last few projects that require paving and the like. I know you're still working on the bike lane project in front of the base, but
That's right, yeah. That paving is scheduled for September 16th, following Chevy Box Run, and then line painting and the like symbols and signage.
great. All right, and I'm sure the CAO will arrange for some sort of ribbon cutting at some point. We can certainly like to thank the base for their support. It's federally funded, as you know.
I just have a question with the work we did at the corner of Anderton and Guthrie. You know, there was major reconstruction on that intersection. And typically we would wait until the developer was developing that corner and ask him for a donation. Or did we get any donation from the owner of that corner?
We waited. We waited, we kept
So-
putting that project off,
I-
and we just got to the point where we had to.
We had to do
We
it.
had to do it.
And so there's no latecomer fee or anything?
No, it would just be through development cost charges that the property would pay. Because a good portion of that project was funded through DCC, so that's how that would be captured.
Director of Finance, any comment?
On a capital work like that, that's DCC eligible, if there had been development there and they built the DCC project, or at least their portion of it, they would have gotten a DCC credit to offset their road DCCs. So they wouldn't have been doubled in. They wouldn't have paid DCCs on top of having to build the infrastructure.
Okay, so then my next question would be, why did we wait so long to do it? I mean,
Well, it's part of the BC Hydro project as well. And then
And sometimes when a new development's proposed, they want their entrances not quite the same place, so there's a modification to the infrastructure that's required. So we did try and work, we were getting some inquiries on the property, so we held off a little bit, thinking, we would let them do their thing. And it got to the point where we had to complete that.
all right, thank you, that clears that up.
further questions? No, certainly we received lots of thanks from residents for that completion of that work.
Probably more thanks than it's over with.
Well, that and, additional sidewalks and bike lanes and safer traffic flow. So indeed, our residents were very patient over the course of the last 3 years for that whole area. So we'll move on to staff reports, Mason Bees and Comox Parks. This is a report from Park Superintendent. His recommendation that park staff be directed to promote pollination or community value and introducing Mason Bees into our public spaces.
I would say move that.
I'll second it.
On that, any discussion, questions? The question I had, I guess, to exactly say in the report where that might be, I assume that you'll do that where appropriate, when appropriate.
Yes. There are a few areas that we could easily implement these Mason bee boxes into. A few areas up in the Butchers Road area with the what I would consider heritage fruit trees. that have been retained in that area under covenant would be an area of interest. I think something maybe around the Philburg in light of fruit trees, both there and in the Orchard Park area, would be of good community value. So there's a number of options and opportunities.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So let us know how that goes. All those in favor? Motion's carried. We have for introduction here the permissive tax exemptions for 2014 and the recommendation from the Director of Finance that bylaw 1355 be forwarded to council for first, second, and third readings. And I believe the deadline for all that has to be by the end of October at the latest.
I would make that motion.
We'll second it.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you for your report, and that'll be brought forward for the first council meeting in October. The first, second, and third reading and adoption before the end of October. All in favor? All right, coming back to this late-breaking issue here, the late item, the multi-material BC packaging and printed paper stewardship plan. As you know, discussed this last week. Further information has been sought and obtained. There is quite a bit of chatter going on at UBCM on Twitter and probably Facebook. Last night in Kamloops, their council decided not to go with MMBC. Prince George has refused to this point. Kitimat and I think some of the lower mainland jurisdictions, according to the story I was reading today, have decided not to. And we're kind of betwixt and between on it. I know our staff are still scratching their heads about it. However, that being said, they have brought forward a recommendation of somewhat of a conditional acceptance. A certain amount of back and forth on this with MMBC. And I would imagine it will be discussed at UBCF with the powers that be there. So at this point, staff have brought forward this recommendation of acceptance for the term shown there no later than March 31, subject to obviously achieving a satisfactory form of contract. And then the second recommendation is that we write to Minister Kolak as well as UBCM and its members, adding our voice to those who are concerned with it. So we can move that and discuss it, or if there's another motion you'd like to make.
I would move it.
Thank you. So move that all together. Is there a second for that?
Second.
All right. We'll open the floor for discussion. Councilor Grant.
I wonder if we could ask the CAO just to give us an overview of what's, because this gets more and more convoluted and everything else. Can you just run this by us one more time so that we can try and understand?
I guess around the three options really is what
Yeah,
we're talking about.
Okay, I'll do my best with the assistance of Shelley and with Dawn, my understanding. So this new organization, Multi-Material BC, which was created essentially by provincial legislation, represents private interests in having to address the packaging and paper that they produce with the stuff we buy. And so they've been legislated to deal with it and get it out of the waste stream. So MMBC was created to represent private interests and basically establish recycling programs in communities if they don't exist, or essentially give municipalities such as ourselves who run recycling programs the first right of acceptance or refusal on this incentive money that they are proposing. In our case, it's around $180,000 to enhance recycling services in our community.
So I'm going to stop you there. Right now, we contract MTerra to pick up our recycling,
Yes.
and they take it away.
Yes.
And rather than us getting any money, we pay them to do that, right?
We pay them roughly $100,000 a year.
$100,000 a year, and what they do with it, we don't know, but it doesn't go into our landfill.
Correct.
So it gets diverted.
Correct.
And that costs us $100,000 a year.
Yes.
If we go to MMBC, we're now going to get $180,000 a year, but we have to do what?
And that's where the conditions in the contract kick in that we talked about in Shelley's first report. There's targeted contamination rates. Right now, on average, we are at about a 6 to 8% contamination rate in the recycling material. The objectives that are outlined in the contract or the targets say that we're supposed to hit 3%. Now, our 6 to 8% is probably what you'll find in other communities. In an article we read about Prince George as an example, they are about 6%. So to get down to 3% is going to be darn hard. It's going to require a lot of education, a lot of public information. It's going to require the collector at the curb to basically leave that material there, put a sticker on it advising the homeowner that, you know, you got stuff in here that's not supposed to be. That's supposed to be documented. We're supposed to follow up with the homeowner to provide the education to say, just wanted to let you know, this can't go in the waste stream or the recycling stream because it's considered contaminant. So there's an enhanced level of service that's required to reach these recycling goals. Now, there's also the heavy-handed penalties. Heavy-handed, those are my terms, but $5,000 a load if those contaminated, or if those levels aren't reached, those 3% contamination levels. And $5,000 a load is the figure in the contract.
But if the contractor is not putting it in his load, he's putting a sticker on it, we're not contaminating the load.
Correct. If that's happening. Now, it's what is the incentive to whomever is collecting that to ensure that it doesn't happen. Right? So there has.
Once you get a big truckload of garbage, how are you going to quantify whether it's 3% or 6 or 9% contaminants? I mean,
Well, it's contamination by weight, right? So it's not by the soft plastics, which are not supposed to go in plastic bags, shopping bags. That's supposed to won't be able to go into your recycling bin if we accept the MABC provisions. That has to go to the recycling depot as well as styrofoam, which right now is just going into the waste stream. So,
And glass.
and glass. And glass would have to go to the depot as well. But we don't allow glass in our recycling right now as it is. So there are some potential benefits. We get money. We can use that money to enhance recycling services in town. But when you read through the contract, as we've pointed out in the first report, it's so one-sided that our risk is quite great in terms of being penalized beyond the level of incentive in which many communities are fearful of as well. I'm hedging our bets, saying that, and this is verbally what was told to us by MABC, is that they're not going to play the heavy-handed card up front. They're going to work with the communities to try and get us to this higher level of recycling, lower level of contamination. So within the 10 months that we have an opportunity here to dip our toe in the water, so to speak. We can try this out and see what it's like.
Sorry, what are you saying, 10 months? Because this isn't going to start till May of next year.
Well, May of 2014 is when it would start,
Right.
under the existing MABC agreement. Our contract, both for garbage collection and recycling with our contractor, goes until March of 2015. So we've got an opportunity there, because we're not going to be able to get out of our contract with Ontario. If we say no, and we say MABC no thanks, you go ahead, you deal with whomever you want, we're still tied to Ontario for the 10 months from May 2014 for recyclable collection.
so then what happens after and Terra's contract expires if we opt out of this, then
Then it's up
MMBC
to,
are gonna take it.
it's up to MMBC to more than likely tender out recycling services in Comox.
Then you get recycling wars, because you're gonna have our contractor going around, and whoever they get the contract could be the same person.
Could,
And all those issues, but, you know, I guess from my perspective and reading all the stuff I've read in the last couple of days about other communities and their concerns, it just seems to me, for the sake of 10 months, that we should just leave everything as a status quo. I understand the incentive, but I'm seriously concerned about these penalties and the fact that this is just being handed to us as a take or leave it. So I have that concern, and I think, well, why don't we just leave it as status quo? Let MMBC sort this out, because there's some major players in the mainland and up in the interior that are not playing ball with these guys at this point. It may be a political posturing, but I don't quite think MMBC is going to have their act together if we don't have enough players. I know the city of Courtney is looking at this, according to the CEO, that they may use some of these incentives to roll out somewhat of a compost pickup program that we currently have on a pilot basis, but I'd rather see us work with the city of Courtney in conjunction with the renewal of the contract with Mterra, or perhaps with MMBC by that point in time. So I would, at this point, suggest we say thanks, but no thanks, and let this storm that's brewing around this sort itself out. I know that the CAO's and staff's recommendation is to accept that with a satisfactory form of contract, but from the responses I see that MMBC is giving to those things, well, they're kind of saying, well, no, we can't change that, we can't change that, and you have a 6-month termination clause, so suck it up and sign it.
So you would prefer to gamble that if we opt out at this time, that there's going to be another opportunity to opt in with the same incentives but a better looking contract?
That's my sense of it at the moment. I don't want to be gambling with taxpayers' money, that's for sure, but I also know the devil we know right now is working for us, and certainly the service is appreciated by our residents. They're paying for it. Now, the downside to leaving the status quo is that essentially they'll be, starting next May, potentially paying twice, because every time they go into a store, there is packaging, they're going to pay a levy and so on and so forth. I think, quite frankly, the September 16th deadline is an artificial one. And, you know, if I'm reading the city of Richmond, the city of Burnaby, some of these big players aren't playing ball with it. You know, why should we do anything different than what those big players are doing and letting it sorted out at UBCM? But that's, you know, I mean, the recommendation staff brought forward is perhaps the same thing, because, you know, subject to achieving a contract, we may never find a contract with MMBC to be satisfactory. So it's kind of a.
So that kind of, by having a subject to in there, that kind of allows us to tell them we're opting in. Sort of, but still leaves us eligible for the incentive.
I guess so. I mean, I don't know whether they're allowing those kind of opt-ins or not.
and, you know, what we're finding, I think what Shelley's research was indicating is that many communities are not, you know, abiding by the online form that they want people filled out. The letters are being sent expressing these concerns, not only to MMBC, but to the province and to UBCM. So everyone's saying very similar things to all these parties. I would be surprised if the province didn't step in at some point, because I can't see this program having much success. I mean, it's basically close to ruining a lot of recycling collection programs that have been long established and developed in all communities across the province. And this seems to be a backward step, not a forward step into what we want to achieve.
And I think even at the industry side, when I read some of the newspaper companies aren't getting a good treatment by MMBC, which is largely, you know, big box retailers that are running that program. MMBC, you must remember, is, it's a statutory body, it's got its membership from the industries that create this waste, and the product packaging and so on. So there's a lot that could unfold here, but certainly those are my concerns. Whether we can achieve them through a resolution, today or next week, perhaps at UBCM we'll hear more. By passing this resolution, it would be a committee of the whole recommendation. It would go forward to the first meeting in October for formal approval, and maybe we'll know more by then, but certainly we would write a letter to the minister if this passes, and she's already been quoted in one of the stories I read about, seeking to work between MMEC and the various municipalities on this. I think the concern that I have is we have a good recycling program. People bought into it. There's been lots of trials and tribulations with it over the years, and I don't want to see that status quo jeopardized, although I do understand that could be by even declining MMBC, because then we could have another collector going around, but that wouldn't happen until next May. So anyway, it's up to council what you guys would like to do, and we certainly put the motion on the table, and we can pass it as is and see what happens. Yep.
Yes, and I certainly like the principle of the market paying rather than the tax, industry paying rather than the taxpayer. And I like the fact that we are seeing it as a pilot. And I would think that MMBC will be trying very hard to work with the people who do come forward, because if the people come forward and go, oh, all your fears are realized, we got in a real mess by going this route, there isn't going to be buy-in. I think they are going to be trying to make it work. I certainly like too that there's a much wider range of products that can be recycled, but I'm just wondering why they aren't curbside pickup, that when you've got to start taking things to other places, it diminishes the amount that people do recycle. And so I would like to see in the future that they look at, they've certainly broadened the scope, but broaden the scope and then have it as a curbside pickup would be the one to get the best results, I would say.
My understanding at one point on this whole program was that they were going to require the stores to take back packaging. You go buy a TV or something, you get all this packaging, you would take it back to the store. You would take it from there, or maybe it's a pickle jar, you take it back to the grocery store.
Prove it.
That's what they've done in other
wrap
places.
your TV on the doorstep.
Well, that's, they're generating that material, and especially with the styrofoam and stuff, but now see a little bit less of it. It's a tough issue. So, the cost benefit to us is obvious. If we could save perhaps $100,000 and even achieve more savings with more incentives that perhaps can be applied to more education and other things for augmenting our service, but there are some warning bells going off in that contract for sure. And I think that's what's caused a lot of the concern around the Lower Mainland and other bigger centers looking at their programs, because we talk about 100,000. I'm sure their numbers are easily in the 7 figures, millions as opposed to the hundreds. So they're looking at some big ticket items there for sure. Yeah.
So it seems to me there's still room at UBCM then for some information gathering, particularly for communities our size, that maybe have already good recycling programs.
I imagine the topic will come up, if not at the mid-sized communities forum, then perhaps during one of the ministry panels that are being held. I don't believe there's any specific agenda on this, although maybe they'll make some sort of session available at UBCM on a sort of urgent basis. Who knows, there could even be a resolution off the floor or some sort of emergency resolution.
I'm sure there'll be questions asked from the ministry panel.
So, passing this resolution today, I guess, gives the staff the authority to press the button and accept, but subject to, and then we come back in the UBCM and maybe we see this again on the October meeting and say, well, I'm not real happy.
I don't think I'm clear yet. What happens if we're not happy in 2015?
Or even now, yeah.
If you're not happy,
To re-engage with the NMBC, and then it's not working for me.
well, according to this resolution, you've got the automatic opt-out, because we're at this stage, we're just saying we're only gonna go until March 31st, 2015. After that, it's NMBC's responsibility. And we would be out of the recycling business.
After 2015.
Yes.
Yeah, it's because we have that contract with Amterra that goes to that length of time. And unless that contract gets renewed earlier, that would be essentially drop dead date on that.
Well, and the other thing is, these incentives, they look pretty good, but by the time you provide containers and you have to hire a staff member, and it's not going to be very much money.
And that's the other thing, some of the larger municipalities don't contract garbage and waste collection out, they have staff doing this work, so there's that whole other aspect of it. And I'm sure the unions starting to express their concerns too, but we don't have that particular issue. All right, so we have a motion on the floor as printed, and is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. More to follow on that, I'm sure. Thank you, staff, for following up on all that. And the last thing is just to motion to receive the correspondence, the monthly police report in July.
So moved.
Those in favor? It's carried. And we have no further items coming before the meeting, I don't believe, so a motion to adjourn.
So is your presentation
Favor?
online?